Hey folks, welcome back. So this week we're going to look at some different ways to make accurate complex selections. Selections are really important in Photoshop, whether you're doing photo composite work or retouching work or anything. You want to make sure that you can select just the pixels that you want to affect or adjust. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. 9 times out of 10, you can get pretty close to the selection you want using either the quick selection tool or the magic wand tool, the marquee tools, or a combination of those. However, there are some cases where you need some different techniques in your arsenal, and so that's what we're going to look at this week. We're going to look at how to make selections with the color range tool. We're going to take a closer look at the refine edge tool, which we worked with a little bit already. And then we're going to take a look at how to make selections with channels, which are usually nested down here next to your layers panel. All right, so we'll deal with that in a minute. I'm giving you 3 images that we're going to work with this week. We have a city, we have a sky image, and then we have Nicolas Cage, just because that's the image that I found that was close to what I wanted for the purposes of this assignment. So there we go. First thing we're going to do is look at the color range command. Now with Nicolas Cage here, we have a few different options that we can do that. First of all, let's say we want to change the color of his shirt here. Now we could use the quick selection tool. We might get a pretty decent selection, but there's a lot of different tones and shadows and highlights in here. So sometimes using a color range feature will allow us to do that. So if there's a specific color that you want to adjust, in this case the blue of his shirts, this can be a useful tool. So with this image selected, we're going to go to select and we're going to go down to color range. All right, now I'm going to go up here and make sure I have sampled colors selected and that detect faces is not selected. And right now you're going to see a black square here or something similar. Yours might look a little different. What we're going to do, we're going to use these eyedroppers to select what colors we want to choose. So the first eyedropper is the eyedropper tool. Then we have add to sample and subtract from sample. So with the eyedropper tool, the first one, I'm going to click somewhere in this blue shirt. All right, you'll see a little bit of white come up. Now I'm going to go to the add to selection tool, and I'm going to click around this blue shirt area, and you're going to see more and more white come up. Now, we're not going to get everything we want, but this just tells Photoshop the area, the color range that we're trying to select here. All right, then we fine-tune that selection using the fuzziness slider and the range slider. The fuzziness is how soft the edges of that selection are, how far out it goes, and the range is how far away from where you clicked Photoshop looks. So the range we want relatively low because we're just going for the shirt. And the fuzziness we can take up a little bit, but we're mainly just trying to select that shirt and nothing else. Now if we get some little errant things over here, we can always go to the subtract from selection and then click around in that area, and that'll kind of fix that up on the brown shirt. But usually a few clicks of the eyedroppers and then a little bit of range and fuzziness is going to get us what we want. That looks like a pretty good selection. So I'm going to click OK. And you're going to see a pretty complex group of marching ants come up here. All right. Now it's left some of the shadows alone, but I think that's going to be okay for what we want to do. So with this selection, I'm going to go over here and click on Hue Saturation to add an adjustment layer. We're all about non-destructive editing. Okay. So I add an adjustment layer, and you'll see it creates it based on our selection. The little white area is what's going to be visible, and the rest is going to be masked out. I'm just going to grab the hue slider in the properties panel and drag it to the left a little bit. And you're going to see that t-shirt change color. All right, so we'll give him a green shirt, forest green. That looks pretty good. So you can see by toggling that layer on and off what we've done. Just change the color, and it looks pretty realistic. All right, so that's one use for the color range feature. Now, this is there's another relatively new feature in color range that allows us to select skin tones. So let's go back to the background layer, select that. Make sure you don't have the adjustment layer selected. You want the background layer. I'm going to go back to select, back to color range, and this time, where it says select, instead of sampled colors, we're going to go down to skin tones. Now you'll see you can also choose only shadows, midtones, or highlights, which is really useful if you want to bump up highlights or shadows or add a little contrast to your image. But in this case, we're going to choose skin tones. And already it does a pretty good job of automatically picking that up. And then if you want to try clicking detect faces, sometimes that'll work better, sometimes it won't. I'm gonna leave it on for now. And the range slider is grayed out, so we're just going to grab the fuzziness slider, move that down just a little bit. Whoops, not too much. To get a pretty good selection of his face. Now, there's going to be a few extra pixels around here. We can try to deal with those here in just a second. So that's a pretty good selection. I'm going to click OK. And again, we're going to get a pretty complex group of marching ants. Now, for these little errant pixels that are selected on his shoulder and his hair, what we can do is just use the quick selection tool. When you get that tool, I'm going to take the brush up a little bit here so you can see it. If I hold down Option or Alt, you'll see that in the middle of that cursor, it turns from plus to minus. So if I hold down Option or Alt on a PC, and then I paint over the areas that I want to remove, it's going to remove those. So hold down Option or Alt, and paint over the little bit in his hair, and on his shoulder. Now that looks pretty good. All right, and there's this part in his goatee right here is not selected. If you want to add to that a little bit, you can. Just don't hold down Option. Leave it alone so you still have the plus sign in there. You can paint over that and add to it. That looks pretty good. All right, so now with this selection, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add another adjustment layer. This time, we'll go to Curves. We'll add a Curves adjustment layer. We just want to give him, he looks a little pale. We're going to give him a little bit of a tan. So if you've never used Curves, this is another way, similar to levels, where you can adjust the output of certain color levels. And the best way to learn it is just to play around with it. I'm just going to grab this diagonal line somewhere down here at the bottom and drag down a little bit. And you'll see what happens when you move it around. I want to drag it. We don't want him to look like he's been going to a tanning bed too long, but just add a little bit of subtle color to his face. So I'm going to take that down about like that. That looks pretty good to me. And if you're not sure what you did, just toggle that adjustment layer on and off. And you can see we just added a little bit of color to his face. That looks pretty good. Now, you'll notice if you zoom in that there are some rough edges and some little areas that are problematic around his hairline and on his cheek. We can fix that using the brush tool by painting directly on the mask. So if I click on this mask thumbnail for the curves layer, and I get my brush, which my brush is huge, I'm going to take that down to a more manageable size. And you want a soft edge, so take the hardness down to 0, about 50 pixels or so. And you can either paint to reveal parts of it or paint to hide parts of it. I'm going to use white. It's my foreground color. And then I just kind of paint around those harsh edges, and it softens them up. And on the cheek, it will bring that tan in right there. We'll paint up here. So that's just a little maintenance to fix selections that are almost just right, but not quite. All right, so that looks good. Zoom out. We've changed his shirt. We've given him a tan. That's about all we're going to do with the color range feature.